20th at 8 p.m. That's statewide, the session in review, Thursday at 8 on public television.
Trout, including brook, lake, and brown trout. Rainbow trout have also been tested in several ponds, lakes, and streams in Maine to see if they could survive. For our salmon, the cultivation process begins in the late fall. Here at Grand Lake Stream in Washington County, Maine, the weather has already turned cold, and the snows of winter are not far off. This makes the work of the hatchery personnel a little less pleasant because the water is also quite cold, and they must work in it for long hours at a time. With adult landlocked salmon, which are just beginning their reproductive cycle, there are two ways of gathering fish. To catch the fish in the wild, the hatchery workers set nets in a fast-moving stream or near the outlet of a lake in fast-moving water, where conditions are the best for the fish to lay their eggs. These nets are quite large, with large wings or leaders to collect the fish and move them toward the box. When the fish move through the throat of the box, they are trapped. Every several days, when the weather is calm and the trap can be tended without danger to the men or injury to the fish, the trap is emptied. The fish are then moved to holding boxes on the calm lake shore. There they are sorted according to sex. Females go in one holding box, while males go in another. The partially submerged boxes have slats that are just wide enough apart to let the water circulate through and keep it fresh inside. When the female is ripe or soft with eggs, the eggs may be taken. This operation is usually performed right at the holding boxes. After the eggs are collected and fertilized with sperm from the male, they are moved to the hatchery. The male and female fish are then released back into the lake to continue their life. If the number of fish trapped in the wild do not produce enough eggs to meet the needs of the hatchery system, then the adult fish raised at the hatchery, called where they are disinfected in an iodine solution to prevent the spread of fish diseases. After the eggs have been disinfected, they are placed on wire trays in troughs of running water. All of these operations are completed within 24 hours because after this first day, the eggs become very fragile and must be handled very carefully.
Spectacular scenery and beautiful country we flew over. I wish I could stay longer. It looks like my kind of a place. Plenty of outdoor activity.
You're in Duluth in your official capacity as a producer now. How does it feel to be on the other end of the camera?
Well, I like it. I was in front of the camera a long time, and I may be back there again. But I like being behind the scenes and helping to put things together and get good people together and make good entertainment. I'm enjoying it a lot.
How is the Academy bearing up now? Are you still the president, or have you abdicated that position?
Well, I'm an ex-president. I served my term 3 years, and I think the Academy is a fine organization. I know a couple of fellows have opted out on the award in the last few years. But on the other hand, the last two winners, Jack Lemmon, Gene Hackman, were grateful to be honored by their colleagues, and when I picked up the statue, it was a great moment in my life to be honored by your fellow workers. So I think the Academy serves a very good purpose, and I hope it thrives.
This tiny paradise island of buggy rides, boat races, and shorts has been shaken by its second incident of murder in just 6 months. Saturday night's killings of Governor Sir Richard Sharples in Bermuda and his aide-de-camp Captain Hugh Sayers came exactly half a month after the gunning down of Police Commissioner George Duckett. Both incidents occurred near here along the North Shore Road at the victims' residences. Both happened on the night of a police social function. Chief Superintendent Bill Wright of the Scotland Yard and several of his assistants have been flown in for the intensive investigation now going on. So far, they've announced no progress. At this point, any connection between the two incidents would be purely theoretical, but it's possible that the killer or killers were the same. A state of emergency imposed on Sunday will affect only those being held in connection with the crimes. It allows for 48 hours of police custody without judicial review. Despite the frightening sound of a state-imposed police emergency, the usual spring influx of tourists hasn't been affected at all. It's business and pleasure as usual, as the authorities continue their intensive investigation as quietly and inconspicuously as possible. From Hamilton, Bermuda, this is John Greenman reporting.
Let's go.
Al Diamond is off this week, and I'm sorry to report that Tom Hanrahan won't be on Media Watch anymore. As many of you know, Tom has said that he doesn't agree with our newly written Media Watch standards, so we have to adapt to Media Watch without Tom. I've asked Don Carrigan, executive producer of Public.
They represent only a part of America, and in fact, a minority.
Okay, we do need to, in all fairness,
We
get
could
to the
talk all
people.
night on
Yeah, I got to cut these guys off because they're
We could be
political
pundits.
animals, they're news hounds. But we've got 4 people waiting already, so let's go to Jonesboro with a call from there. Go right ahead.
Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Good. Well, this is about the elections, too, but I'm mad at the media and reporters especially for not demanding of politicians that they come up with real concrete solutions to the problems that we have. Maine is being stripped of our resources, and profits are going out of state, and they talk about one another, all this nonsense that nobody cares about, total nonsense.
So the media really didn't get after them and get them to
No.
come out with solutions. Is that your impression, Suzanne?
I think that was one of the knocks on the Joe Brennan campaign, that
Worry. We're still people who like to tell stories, who like to hear stories. And
A lot of it, though, also happens to be what else is available that day. And if there isn't a string of days when something more important is available, one story can take on a life of its own.
I have a slightly more pedantic.
And thank you for your calls. We'll be back next week. I'm John Greenman. Good night.
Or given the politicians a little more respect.
That's certainly the message we're getting from the politicians, who are very appreciative of this. But I just wonder, Dave, I may be arguing along with you on this. What is the public learning? Is there a public out there to learn during the daytime?
Well, there are a lot of people.
Simply a facade. It's just basically done for
But it's what
those
you
people
see
who
day
are
after day,
testifying.
Dave.
It's just done for those people who are testifying. The real work starts next week.
Well, certainly.
Well, they've certainly changed their habit of what clothes they wear. We've noticed
really?
that.
Oh, the committees,
come on.
yeah,
yes.
that-
They've
that's-
endured great heat and stress under fire. No lights. We don't use lights, but a lot of them have been wearing jackets and very nice clothes that perhaps they might not have.
And there's a lot of grumbling among committee members saying that so and so is grandstanding. White household.
Tom, you've exposed yourself as using.
I urge everyone to go out and buy that book. What a read.
Tom, last year you said one of your prime source of information was the National Enquirer. So
I subscribe to the National
We know
Enquirer.
where you're coming from.
Well, I'm just saying, Tommy, I think it's disappointing that people are more interested to read about Frank Sinatra and Nancy Reagan than they are about Reagan and Iran-Contra decisions.
I watch each week your program, hoping maybe someday you'll acquire the wisdom of age. Oh, well, me too, but for the time being, youthful ignorance is pretty blissful, I must say. Last and certainly least, our double-headed headline, which comes from Michigan: Crater may be smoking gun in dinosaurs' end. The less said about that one, the better. That's the Notebook for this week. I'm John Greenman. Thanks for joining us.
Woodsman's Corner.
Welcome back. I'm John Greenman, and this is the beginning of the 5th year of Maine Reporter's Notebook. We don't plan any dramatic changes for this season, but we are going to set aside a spot towards the end of each program for the Letters to the Editor column. So get your pens and pencils out and tell us what cranks your case, what makes you smile, or what needs to be said. Meanwhile, for most of each program, we'll continue to give you some additional insights into some of the week's top news stories. And this week, we'll do that with the help of Mal Leary from the Capital News Service, Al Diamond from WPOR Radio in Portland, Glenn Chase from the Lewiston Daily Sun, and Bob Steele, Assistant Professor of Broadcast Journalism at the University of Maine. Let's take a look first at the crisis that seems to be building regarding workers' compensation. Mal, why the special session on October 21st?
That's what a number of people are asking.
Best thing to do is sort of look like you're searching and don't find anything.
Now, Senator Cohen and Mitchell are trying to get Congress to pass legislation to stop the search from going on, but how realistic is that? I mean, isn't it going to just divide between East and West?
I think there may be a possibility of doing something like that, because no state wants the nuclear waste dump, and if you can be pretty sure it's not going to be
to get their point across, almost like a referendum campaign.
Now, the political ante has been raised considerably with the insertion into the many voices by Ed Muskie of his point of view just recently. How will that change the fight?
I don't know that it will. A lot of people have around the state have commented on.
From Bangor, St. John, New Brunswick, and Halifax, Nova Scotia, this is Maine Reporter's Notebook. This week, a special cross-border look at the issues that tie and chafe at the relationship between Canada and the United States as we make a Canadian connection. Good evening. I'm John Greenman in Bangor, and I'm very pleased to introduce the executive editor and co-anchor of the MacNeil-Lair NewsHour, Robert MacNeil, who got his start in broadcasting in his native Halifax. Mr. MacNeil is visiting Maine to take part in the University of Maine's Canada Week activities and to visit some of the NewsHour's strongest supporters, the people who watch MPBN TV. Welcome, Mr. MacNeil. Thank you for coming.
Much. Thank you.
Also on hand for this cross-border conversation are Harold Shea, retired editor-in-chief of the Chronicle Herald in Halifax. Mr. Shea is in the studios of Halifax Cablevision. In St. John, we have St. John, New Brunswick at Fundy Cablevision, CBC reporter Neil Stairs. And here in Bangor, Alan Miller, Professor of Journalism and Broadcasting and Acting Director of the Public Information Office at the University of Maine. Professor Miller is also on the faculty of the Canadian American Studies Center. And Charles Horn, former reporter for MPBN Radio and now a reporter for WZON Radio in Bangor. Mr. Horn received a master's degree in Canadian Studies from Carleton University in Ottawa, which also happens to be the alma mater of Mr. MacNeil. Well, this conversation is being taped 2 days before Prime Minister Mulroney and President Reagan get together for their annual summit meeting, so what we talk about should be thought of with that fact in mind. And first, I'd like to ask Robin, from your point of view, Mainers, I should say, Mainers have long felt that our
curiosity from this side of the border, meaning from Washington, and that's basically how I think of it.
Is this something that you feel everybody in this country shares with you? Is that
no, I don't. I think there is, and witness the study program at the university here, I think there is an awakening interest in Canada. The days when an Al Capone could say, I don't even know what street Canada's on.
Something has got to be done about acid rain, and we've done something, now it's your turn.
Okay, that sounds pretty reasonable. Mm-hmm. How about the whole problem, as we've been talking about, of northerly direction in news analysis and news coverage as opposed to southerly? There doesn't seem to be all that much coverage of events that happen in the Maritimes in the main press. There are some bureaus that do pick it up, but do you folks feel neglected, or how do you think about that?
Well, I don't think we feel particularly neglected, because we're not, that we don't show up on the American channel just across the border in Maine, or that we're not reading about ourselves in the Maine newspapers all the time. You talk about North and South. I think right now, or for the last few years at least, we tend not to be too worried about that. If we want to know about something,
And not putting as much Canadian news on as I should, I still think it's streets ahead of where it was
Do you find
a generation ago.
Do you find yourself protecting an underlying, perhaps, bias by not putting Canadian news on?
Maybe.
Robert?
Yeah.
It was mentioned that earlier about the United States needing friends, and Canada looks in a prime position.
We only have about 20 seconds left. Do either of you folks in Canada have something to add? Ghost in there. Well, we only have about 20 seconds left. Do either of you folks in Canada have something to add to wrap this up and put it in a nice tight ball?
Well, I don't know. I think we're doing okay. We have no complaint to make, you know.
That's a very encouraging, positive note to end on. Thank you very much. As everything else that's good happens, this good thing must come to an end too. Thanks very much to Harold Shea at Halifax Cablevision in Halifax, to Neil Stairs at Fundy Cablevision in St. John, to Alan Miller, and to Charles Horn, and our very special guest, Robert MacNeil, here in Bangor. We leave you now with a quote from Winston Churchill, who once said of the Canadian border, "That long frontier from the Atlantic to the Pacific Oceans, guarded only by neighborly respect and honorable obligations, is an example to every country and a pattern for the future of the world." For Maine Reporter's Notebook, I'm John Greenman. Good night.
To comment on this program, drop us a line at Maine Reporter's Notebook, P.O. Box 1980.
Management of the Press. I'm John Greenman, and joining me this week on Maine Reporter's Notebook are Davis Rawson, State House Bureau Chief for the Bangor Daily News, Bill Frederick, Maine Editor for the United Press International, and Susan Kimball, reporter for WCSH-TV in Portland. Our top story of the week, 1A's victory over the two other low-level nuclear waste choices in the referendum vote may end up being questioned. And although no one has actually asked for a recount yet, why is the recount possible?
Well, as the town clerks called into the Bangor Daily News, which was, I don't think anybody's made that effort yet, and I hope they don't.
There was a significant difference between the number of votes that came in for the other referendum questions and one, wasn't there? I mean, there was a perceivable difference, as I understand.
Well, again, that was because some of these ballots were...
A lot of that has to do with how much money you've got in your own wallet.
That's true.
Well, speaking of concern, there's a lot of people down in York County now, Bill, that are concerned about losing their job. I understand that Nike Shoe is leaving the state. What's going to happen with it?
It's leaving the country in the sense that these are the last two domestic shoe plants that Nike operates domestically
paying a lot more for a vacation that you didn't want in the first place. So you have to be very, very careful.
The old axiom, the buyer beware.
Yes, yes. So we have cliches like that for a purpose.
Yeah, well, what should people be on the lookout for aside from just the language? I mean, you almost have to be a lawyer sometimes to figure this stuff out.
Well, it's pretty easy. We've gotten it down to a science now. If you receive something like this in the mail, the very first thing you can do to protect yourself is to look for the address of the company that is doing the promotion. Free, then you'll be safe.
And yet they're doing it for a particular purpose, and that is to make money. Are they successful at it?
Oh yes, they must be, because they have proliferated to a degree that I cannot believe in the last 6 months. Unfortunately, there are not this particular operation that we talked about previously. Venture Out is legit. There are, however, companies that are completely fraudulent, that are just scam operations. Many of them operate out of Arizona and California. One of them that we are in the process of investigating now is taking in approximately $9,000 a day, 6 days a week from consumers on a completely fraudulent vacation scam. And the problem with not catching them is the postal inspector
is being that remarkable. I think it's just happened that way.
I suppose if you look at history as a continuum, it used to be that men were at the very, very top, and as you say, the women have just outlasted. So maybe it's just a case of women finally outlasting. Maybe that. Susan, what do you think?
I don't know. I'll be here longer than the rest of you guys anyway.
Just wait around.
I like seeing women, though, in middle management, and I think that's what we're talking about here. I think that's really necessary, and we don't see that. even in broadcast journalism in Maine. I have to do say for Bangor, Channel 2 with Margot Cobb. We've got a wonderful woman in place there, but it would be nice to see more.
Well, I used to get a kick.
Real quick, Bill.
Oh, all right. I used to work on a Senate staff, and I was always amused how the Congress always kind of kept itself, would pass OSHA laws, for example, would exempt itself. And
there it is. Okay, thank you. We've got to stop. That's it for this week. Thanks to Davis Rawson and Bill Frederick of the State House in Augusta, and to Susan Kimball in Portland. Until next week at this time, I'm John Greenman. Good night. Good evening. I'm John Greenman, Public Affairs Producer for MPBN. My co-host for Proximities is Kenneth Curtis, former Governor of the state of Maine, U.S. Ambassador to Canada, and the current President of the Maine Maritime Academy. It's indeed a pleasure to have you on board.
John, I'm delighted to join you in this series. As you know, in the next few months, we plan on exploring a great deal of territory in the realm of regional partnerships between Canada and the United States, and more specifically between Maine and the Maritime provinces.
Time connection and political and military links between our regions, to name just a few.
We're very fortunate tonight to have our first guest on Proximities, the Premier of Nova Scotia, the Honourable John Buchanan, who is in his 4th consecutive term as Premier, making him the Dean of all Canadian Premiers, and the Governor of our own state of Maine, the Honourable John McKernan, who was a former 1st District Congressman, state legislator, and now serving his first term as governor. And it's a particular pleasure to welcome you back, Premier Buchanan. You've been a great friend to the state of Maine, and certainly you and Governor McKernan have demonstrated that the relationship between Maine and Nova Scotia is alive and well and extremely friendly.
Well, most of the issues that we're going to be concentrating on tonight are interrelated in some way. So to provide some flow and organization to the evening, we've created 4 categories to deal with. The first being the Maine Maritime Connection, a general overview. Then we'll go to trade, theory and practice, and energy and the environment, and finally, regionalism, conflict and cooperation.
The Maine Maritime Connection. Cultural, military, and political links of yesterday and today.
We already know, Premier Buchanan, of the very...
We have a wonderful relationship because of that.
As a matter of fact, there's such a wonderful relationship traditionally and historically. We're surrounded on 3 sides by Canada. There are a lot of people in Maine
That's
say,
right.
what are we? Are we Canadians or are we Americans?
One other
that's
thing
probably not a joke for you, Governor.
I should mention is that back in the turn of the century to right up into the present time, the relationship that has developed in the fishing.
Don Carrigan.
Good evening and welcome to True North. Don Carrigan is off this week. I'm John Greenman. Spring is here, or so they try to tell us, but no matter what the weather is, Memorial Day proves it. Now, a lot of people may have forgotten what the holiday is really about. It's remembering those who died in wartime. People in the small town of Southport haven't forgotten, and even if they tried, a young woman named Sarah Brewer wouldn't let them. As Don Carrigan tells us, Sarah Brewer made sure Southport would always be an island that remembers.
Do you remember being scared?
.org. We'll be back next week. Hope you will too. Thanks for watching, and good night for all of us at True North.
Production of True North on Maine Public Television is
gone haywire. As John Greenman tells us, Fox is being called the new Rachel Carson, the new Upton Sinclair.
Programs are not very good, but you
may remember Nichols Fox. 4 years ago on Media Watch, she was criticizing media coverage of foodborne illness.
This is a public health issue. Let's suppose that 50 people who...
Since then, Nikki Fox has lived a quiet life with her dog Millie near Southwest Harbor. But that's changing. With national articles on the newsstands and the networks knocking on her door, Nikki's moving into the fast lane.
Well, we'll be going to the farm together, so it's
The CBS magazine 48 Hours visited for a July segment, and Fox is now on a book tour. It's all because of this, her soon-to-be-released expose of what's wrong with our food.
We see this as an environmental problem. We're looking at the ecology of foodborne disease, looking at how changes in how we produce, process, and distribute foods, as well